Our workshop is about the impact of COVID on non-standard forms of employment. And we'll have our speaker give a short presentation at the start. We'll open the floor for questions. And then there'll be time for 2 further questions to our speaker. We'll have him give brief remarks to the questions posed, and then we'll open again the floor for questions from the participants. Okay. So for today, to speak on the impact of COVID and non-standard forms of employment in general and its impact on the working conditions and the world of work, we have Sergei Suarez, a labor economist with the International Labor Organization. So hi, Sergei.
Hello.
You have the floor.
Thank you very much.
Could you give your initial presentation, that would be good.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for getting my last name right. Almost nobody does. So let me try to present now. Share screen. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can see it, Sergey.
Okay, wonderful. So, non-standard forms of employment. Non-standard forms of employment is that kind of catch-all term to include many different things that are not your usual permanent, full-time work at the employer's premises, formal, with a labor card, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we all know this kind of standard employment when we see it, okay? But there are multiple ways in which employments can be different from your standard type of employment. I have a list here of 5, but this is just starting. The more we go, the more we find out that there are new and diverse forms of employment that we did not imagine, that we did not understand, and still don't understand very well. They just keep on cropping up all the time, particularly with the changes in the labor market and the digital transformation and all of that. All of this just leads to more and more and more non-standard forms of employment. So here I have a list of 5, but you could add more to that. But these are often, these are 5 which are very, very often talked about. So part-time work, which is not a full-time job, temporary work, so you have a contract, but it has a implicit or explicit date saying, this contract only goes up to this certain point. Multi-party arrangements, which is where your boss is not really your boss. You're hired by one firm to work in another firm. Working from home, something which has been very relevant. So most of us have been involved in non-standard forms of employment over the last 2 years. And dependent self-employment, which is also very common. It is that person which is legally, he is self-employed, but economically he is a subordinate. He is subordinate to somebody. He's actually an employee in economic terms. So that these are just some of the possibilities of non-standard forms of employment. Another one which I didn't put in here because it is evolving too rapidly, and we still have, let's say, our understanding of this is still limited, is platform work, which is also very, very, it's a growing and common, not that common, but increasingly common form of employment also. Things like Uber or Glovo, where you actually, it's not very clear whether you are an employee or you just, it's just a platform is only intermediating work. So let me pass on to the next one. So I'm going to talk about what has happened to these and what their effects are over the course of the pandemic. So part-time work. On the left, okay, where you have all the different colors, lines with a lot of different colors, okay. On the left, we have various countries up to the pandemic, but not including the pandemic. So you can see that part-time work has, and here part-time work I'm defining as less than 35 hours, which is a simplistic way to define it, but there is no other way that you can easily look at the data and come up with numbers. So you can see that part-time work has been increasing in Canada. It has been increasing in the 6 original countries of the European Union, France, Netherlands, Germany, etc. It has been more or less stable in Great Britain, falling in Indonesia and the Philippines, slightly falling in the United States, increasing in Brazil, increasing in South Africa, very low, and decreasing in the Russian Federation. So 2 things. Part-time work is all over the place. Some countries have a lot of it. Other countries have relatively little. And in some countries, it's increasing. In other countries, it's decreasing. A statistical model shows a very slight increase trend, worldwide trend, and increase in part-time work. If we look at the pandemic, we see something which is really interesting. As here, the gray area here is the pandemic, okay? The white area is before the pandemic. Can you see the difference between the colors? Because the gray is not very clear, not very dark. Okay, so what we see is that with the pandemic, okay, you had a slight trend of increase here, which was probably seasonal. You have a definite increase in part-time work during the first 2 quarters of the pandemic. And then it comes down again. It doesn't matter tremendously the number of countries which I include in the analysis. 9 countries I include the 9 countries for which we have most up-to-date data, which would be United States, Mexico, Canada, where Indonesia, where we have a lot of data which is up to date, and 21 country just includes some other countries, and 31 countries includes just about every country for which we have any data from the pandemic. And they all, I mean, the 31 country doesn't yet show this, but it probably will. They show the same idea that part-time work increased and then it fell. Here's something. This is for Mexico, but all 11 countries that we looked at are the same. This is the chance of losing your job. Okay, and this, which means transitions out of work. It can mean into unemployment, out of the labor force, even furloughed. The chances of losing your job depending on how many hours you worked. So those who worked fewer hours had a very high chance of losing their jobs in Mexico, something along the lines of 60 to 70% if they were self-employed, and between 50 and 60% if they were employees. Okay, and this falls until we come to people who work around 40 to 50 hours per week, and then it no longer falls with increases in hours. So part-time work is also insecure work. It makes it less likely that you will keep your job. Okay, trying to make this as fast as possible, let's go on and talk a little bit about temporary work. Here we have the same thing as before, various countries trying to figure out whether temporary work is rising or decreasing. And it's also all over the place. Some countries have a lot of it, other countries have relatively little. In some it's increasing, and in others it's decreasing. A statistical model also shows that temporary work is slowly, also slightly increasing globally, or at least was previous to the pandemic, okay? Here we have the same thing. Which is just trying to get the last year here is the pandemic year, okay? And what we see is that there's not much, there hasn't been much impact of temporary work on the pandemic on temporary work. It continued more or less the same as it was before. Now, something which is very strong and unfortunately continued is that temporary workers are paid considerably less than permanent workers. Here are the wage penalties for temporary work. So this is not just a comparison of hourly wages. This is taking into consideration all other characteristics such as education, the level of qualification that you have, your age, your sex, and so on. And still, it shows that temporary workers are paid considerably less than permanent workers, which is something that, theoretically should not happen. And as with part-time work, temporary work is also a very insecure form of work. Well, obviously, but the very name is like that. So here are the transition rates between different quarters when the pandemic arrived. So from Q1 to Q2, in Argentina, 42% of temporary workers lost their jobs, as compared to 17% of permanent workers. Okay? And you can see that in every case, the temporary workers were at a high probability of losing their job. In some places like Chile, it was 73% of temporary workers lost their jobs. In other places, not as much. Poland, for example, only 9%. But if you look at permanent workers, it's 3%. So temporary workers are poorly paid. Temporary workers are insecure in their jobs. Finally, I'll just talk a little bit about working from home. Okay, here is a map showing that working from home varies immensely, just like temporary work and part-time work. There are countries in which there's an awful lot of working from home, such as Indonesia, the Philippines, and Cambodia, and Zambia, and other countries in which there's very little, such as Australia or the Russian Federation or Spain. And of course, in this case, the changes were not minor. When you look at those people who worked from home when the pandemic struck, the numbers increased dramatically. In Argentina, they go from 6 to 22%. In Costa Rica, from 9 to 23. In Ecuador, not that much. They go from about 10 to about 12. In Italy, from 4 to 18. In Slovakia, from 4 to 9. In Portugal, from 7 to 21. This you see across the board. I'm just showing 6 countries here so as not to tire you. But this is across the board. With the pandemic, everybody started working from home. No news. Everybody knew that, no, but it did happen. And something very interesting is that when you look at working from home, its impact upon wages, it's less clear than you would think. When you look at home workers, you see a distribution of earnings with 2 peaks. So let me tell you what these graphs mean. Here is the earnings in a logarithmic scale, okay, in whatever currency is used in that country. So it's rupees for India, pesos for Mexico, pounds for the United Kingdom. And the height of the curve is how many people make that amount of money. So for the non-home-based workers, okay, employees who are not home-based, you have this gray curve here. So we can see that in India, for this year that I looked, most people made somewhere a little less than 10,000 rupees. In Mexico, maybe around 700 pesos. In the United Kingdom, somewhere around, I would guess about, 7,000 pesos, around 700 pounds would be probably the most likely figure here for the United Kingdom. When you look at the home workers, you can see that there are clearly 2 types of home workers. So here in the United Kingdom, there's a lot of home workers who are very highly paid. As a matter of fact, they are more highly paid than non-home workers. But then there's another group which is poorly paid. Actually, they make a lot less than those who are not home workers. And you see these 2 groups anywhere. United Kingdom here, India, you see the poorly paid group here and the well-paid group here. Mexico, maybe even 3 groups. But what you can see is that there are different types of home workers. The highly paid ones are, of course, the teleworkers, managers who work from home, professionals who work from home. And the poorly paid ones are, for the most part, the industrial home workers. So people who are rolling biddies in India, who are making arts and crafts in Mexico, who are working in textile in the United Kingdom. And yes, there is still a putting out system in the United Kingdom, So what we can see is that all of these non-standard types of employment, there are considerable challenges associated to the rights of workers related to these types of employment. We do not have the position, I mean, and I think it'd be wrong to have the position that these types of employment are wrong or should be combated or are not valid types of employment, or they are going towards extinction, but they do have challenges. And here I'm just showing a few of the challenges, because all of these types also have challenges in access to Social Security. They have challenges related to workplace safety. There are all kinds of different challenges related to these non-standard types of work. And so in my opinion, our challenge is not to extinguish these types of work, but to transform them into decent jobs. That's basically what I wanted to say, just to get the ball rolling. I hope I didn't take too long.
Yeah, thank you, Sergey. We can now open the floor for any questions. So that was an interesting presentation about the changes in non-standard employment during the pandemic. So any questions from the participants? Yeah, Yen, did I get that right?
Could you hear me?
Then George, yeah.
Could you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I would like to raise a question about working from home, because it's increasing now during the pandemic, and how it look like in the next years when it become normal. I mean, lots of workers has a standard contract, a standard worker, and now because of the pandemic, they turn to working from home, with turn to non-standard categories. How it look like in the next year when it becomes new normal, when they still drove in this category. Thank you.
So you can answer, Sergey, before I call on the next one.
Okay, so we don't know for a fact what will be the new normal, but the vast majority of analysts believe that the new normal will not be the old normal. That a lot of people have tried working from home and hated it, and they want to go back to the office or the factory or whatever as soon as they can. But a lot of people found that it's not that bad, particularly if they can have access to some kind of hybrid work arrangement where they work some days from home, some days from the office or at the factory. I'm looking right now at the data because we have, for a few countries, data, let's say post-normalization data. So for the United States, we have post-normalization data. And it looks like working from home will be, it will settle into a higher level than it was before the pandemic started. Before the pandemic started, the total working from home globally was about 7%. About 7% of world workers worked from home. And actually, it didn't matter too much whether you looked only at employees or at all workers. It was close to around that. And this increased to close to 20% at the height of the pandemic. So never was working from home a majority. In some countries it was. In England, for example, in the United Kingdom, it became very briefly a majority. But for the most part, there still remained a lot of essential workers who worked from their from offices, driving trucks in factories, and so on. And then it's come down from the global 20-something% that or close to 20%, and we believe it will settle somewhere between the old 7 and the 20, probably much closer to the old 7. We don't have good data yet, but we believe that the new normal will be higher, that there will be more working from home than there was before, particularly in telework, but also in other types of work.
Yeah, thank you, Sergey. That answered the question, Yen. Okay, so let me call on George.
Thank you. I was following in the readings, and then now I hear from Suarez what he just said concerning the low pace of temporary or say part-time workers. And I start to think, do we know why this is the case, that these people are paid lesser? And I'm drawing this question from the fact that we have experienced where you have, say, permanent workers who have some issues and sometimes they will not be able to show up to work. And so in my country, Liberia, what happens usually if they have to take somebody to fill up for you, usually they deduct from you like a day and a half wages because they are saying they are going to pay somebody who did not have the plan to come and so forth and so on. So in our opinion, those kinds of people are paid more than the permanent workers because they also let us know that these people are not taking medical insurance and those kinds of benefits that come with permanent workers. So then what is happening in between that is leading to low pays for these short-term employees? Thank you. I don't know if I'm clear on this.
I think it was clear. I'm the one who's not going to be able to be clear. Well, it's a fact that overall temporary workers are paid less. They often, as you said, do not have the benefits that should be accorded to them. Even when the law says that they should have these benefits, very often in practice they don't have them. So go to a country, look at the laws. Okay, the laws say that formal temporary workers are entitled to this, this, and this, and that. And then you go to the labor force survey, which sometimes asks, do you have paid leave? Do you have maternity leave? All these things? In theory, the law says they should have them, and they say no, we don't have these things. So the somewhat precarious nature of these non-standard forms of employment is a reality. Okay, now why is a whole different question. There are theories that labor economists and labor sociologists, there is a myriad of theories about this. So there would be labor market segmentation, that would be probably the most popular mainstream one, or at least I suppose, yeah, would be the most popular. That there is some kind of labor market segmentation, so that you have much as in formal and informal markets, you have an insider market of people who are labor market of people who are permanent employees of a company, who have a union, who have a voice, they can make themselves heard, they have bargaining power. And then you have the outsiders who have no bargaining power, they have no representation, and thus they are short, they get the short end of the stick in everything, okay? Not everybody believes in this explanation. There are those who say that in reality, these are different types of workers and there is a heterogeneity, that in reality, a lot of these part-time workers or temporary workers are not as productive as the other workers. I personally have trouble believing these theories, but they exist also. I would tend to go more with labor market segmentation. But it's definitely an open question in research terms. I'm sorry that I can't give you a definite answer, but there isn't one. There isn't an answer for which we can say this is a consensual answer among labor economists or labor sociologists.
Yeah, thank you, Sergey. Unless there's a follow-up from George, I see on the chat a question from Rasak. Would you like to ask this personally, or should I just read it? Rasak's question is, what can trade unions do to accommodate these part-time workers? I don't know if is the question clear, or should we ask?
Oh, it's clear to me. But once again, I'm not sure I'm going to give a satisfactory answer. First, I'm not an expert in bargaining. So in negotiation, I don't know that much about trade unions, although I was the president of a trade union once a long time ago. But my tendency would be to say, how can trade unions accommodate part-time workers? And I would extend this to all non-standard forms of employment. I would say, first of all, accommodate them, let them in, because very often trade unions are loath to let in marginal workers. So often you have a firm which has a cadre of a nucleus of formal workers or permanent workers or full-time workers or workers who work in the firm. And then you have these other, which are, more outsiders, marginal workers, which are either informal, or they are temporary, or they are part-time, or they are working from home. And the union just doesn't want them. They're not open to them. And I think that the first thing is just open the doors, let the people in. And of course, each of these will have their own peculiarities, things that are important to them, which are perhaps less important to the remainder of the employees. But this can only be seen once they are, within the union, participating in the meetings, paying dues, and all of that. I'm sure I know that this is a very incomplete answer, and everybody knew about this already, but that's probably the best one I can give right now.
Yeah, so I don't see any hand anymore or questions. So maybe this one, Sergei, somehow related to the last one. What has been like effective forms of regulating non-standard forms of employment in either international in the different countries? Are there like any best practices in regulation?
Okay, so I can tell you what has not necessarily worked as well as we should have liked. Just passing legislation. As with many other, not non-standard forms of employment, if you just put a law, very often the law will not become reality. And there are many countries, many cases of countries, different countries with different types of non-standard forms of employment, which have passed a law, but there has been little change. They sign up for they ratify the ILO convention. There's not much change. They pass the law. There's not much change, because this has to become also part of what the labor inspectors do. So the labor inspectors they must know that okay, now we have to, when we go do our labor inspection, we have to worry also about temporary workers, and also about part-time workers, and also about home-based workers who we won't see at the factory that we're going to visit, or the office that we're going to visit, but we know that they are related to this factory or to this office. So it's I think that something which is it has to go beyond just doing the legal part. There has to be the enforcement part, and on the part of the trade unions. Once the trade unions are open to non-standard forms of employment and receive these workers in, we have seen many examples across the world of trade unions improving dramatically improving and rapidly improving the lives of these new members due to the fact that they offer a channel of negotiation and a way, often to make laws which were already on the books a reality. So you have examples with home workers, which are some of the most marginalized, most precarious workers that exist anywhere. Once they manage to get their organization, either making an organization of their own or participating in a larger trade union, it is it's sometimes the gains that they have are really impressive.
Yeah, thanks, Sergey. I see from Yen. Oh, there's a raised hand from GIF. I'll call GIF first. Yes, GIF,
okay.
you have a question.
Okay, thank you. It's unfortunate that my network is a bit weak, so I will not be able to switch on my video. But however, I just wanted to comment on whether putting it into law, regularizing the non-standard work practices. But when you look at it, I concur with that sentiment, because I'll give an example of our country, Zimbabwe, where the government said that it gave the bargaining platforms. Here in Zimbabwe, we bargain at industrial level. So the bargaining platforms at industrial level were given the powers to regulate the non-standard form of employment, in particular, perpetual renewal of fixed-term contracts. So they said they gave the powers to those platforms to say, fix this issue. Whatever law that you give, it will be applied in that particular industry or a sector. But the outcome of it is that most of the sectors then regularize that by putting a law. But in actual fact, there was nothing that it was not responding to the actual mischief that you wanted to cure. You'd find that some sectors, for example, would say, they then made an agreement to say a worker would become a permanent employee if he works continuously for 10 years. So you put that into law, and no one will reach the 10 years mark. So in actual fact, you have not cured the mischief. But now, when you look at it on the face of it, we say there's a law that is there that regulates. But in actual fact, it doesn't regulate at all. So it has also to come to us as trade union to say, what are the laws that we are advocating for? Are the laws responding to the issues that we are raising? Because we may put laws that may not necessarily respond to the issues that are being faced by the non-standard workers who are in non-standard forms of employment. So I just wanted to share this with you.
Yeah. So
might I ask what country were you talking about?
Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe.
Yes. Yeah.
So no question, gift, right? Just a sharing.
But I'd just like to say thank you for the example. It's a very interesting example. I wrote it all down.
Actually, here where I reside, the Philippines, one of the key demands of the trade unions is to legislate a strict regulation of non-standard employment. So yeah, that's a very interesting comment of Sergei about that. There's also comment, Yen, or is this a question?
It is a comment because we also need to take into account that the wages in the actual or the real wage is decreasing because of for working from home workers or teleworker, because they bear all the cost, and yeah, that also affect their standard of living, and also there's a threat of that they step out of the trade unions knowing that they don't need such a network, they don't need such to be in such a network to be protected and so on. And but also the trade union also have some spaces for their improvement, you know, in wage negotiation, collective bargaining, that's to increase the wage for home worker, teleworkers when they work from home, and that's, for example, an amount of subsidized or something like that, in order to give them more, to support them more in if they work from home. That's my comments. Yeah.
There is an argument to be made about that home workers should both make more and they should make less than workers who work in the factory. They should make more because they have to pay for electricity. They have to sometimes pay for internet connections, for the tools, for, part of the instruments of production that should be in the hands, of the employer are in their hands. So that's an argument that they should be paid more. And then there's an argument that they should be paid less because since they don't have to go to work, they don't have to do the commute. The commute costs money. They get to live further away. But any of these arguments, we're talking about rather small amounts. When you actually look at the data and see how much home-based workers or home workers make relative to those who are not, and once again, I say with the same qualification, age, et cetera, the differences are way beyond any compensating differential. It's things like 30% less, 40% less. Sometimes they make half as much. I mean, if you look at, if I'm not wrong, the data that we had for India was that the home-based workers were making half as much as workers who did not work from home. There's no way you can justify that, saying, okay, you didn't need to pay the bus fare, so I'm going to pay you half as much. No way.
Yeah, that's a very relevant piece of information. I'll call on George and then Edlira, but before that, there's a comment from Rasak. I think that was while Sergei was talking about unions accommodating non-standard for workers. Most of these factory workers are not allowed to unionize. They're threatened by companies or government. Yeah. So yeah, George, your question.
Thank you. Mine is not a question, but I wanted to make this comment because along the lectures, the readings, and even I followed the video clip of former President Barack Obama, everybody is pointing towards the issue of low wages, from having no collective bargaining to weaker trade union institutions, as some of the cardinal reasons for these things. But what people are not talking about, and that's what I really want to point to, and I keep pointing to it, I don't know when it will be heard or what can be done about it. And it has to do with the fact that the ILO recognizes tripartism, where you have the government, the employer, and the workers. And in my opinion, this should be a kind of a social partnership where everybody has equal opportunity to express and to be listened to. But when you look at the dynamics, you realize that workers are marginalized at all levels, even before the ILO. And this is the problem. That's what is undermining the strength of the unions. Because the ILO relies on the unions to be able to speak out to reports from governments. Government wouldn't say when they are now implementing a certain protocol that they have signed up to. It is the workers who will always point that out. But when the workers point that out, they become antagonized by a government and sometimes even the employers. And the cases come before the ILO. Sometimes the diplomacy, is so long. There's this, flexibility, Some cases, like I will always refer to Zimbabwe because I spoke to that issue on the floor in 2019. After 10 years of the case being before the ILO and workers are being, suppressed, sometimes they even kill them, put them in jail. And the case is before the governing body for 10 years. Some people will never see justice until they die. Justice delay is justice denied. And when people see these things happening, they are also afraid to come out because they see no justice for the working class. And that is why that point that comes to the unions being weakened comes in. I think that is what is bringing it in. So I think there is a need for the ILO herself to work on her mechanisms to strengthen themselves in a way that gives justice or that is able to bring about, fair play and not just playing nice voice and meme and shame. Some people don't care about shaming. They don't have the conscience, they don't have the remote. So you say anything, they leave from there. In fact, they do even worse. The delegation of the workers come and they arrest them at the airport and they are in jail until the next ILC. And what people do, they just name and shame again. But people are in jail, their families are being denied. And who will see that and still stand up on the line to speak out for workers? I think that is the real issue that we are now talking to. And I don't know how we can get it said enough for everybody to listen and do something about it. Thank you.
George said that it's not really a question, but a comment. So yeah, I don't know if you, Sergei has a reaction or...
All I can say is point well taken.
Yeah. I guess that's the same for the case of the Philippines. So Edlira has a question.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sergei, for the very interesting presentation and the data. Going a bit back to the discussion earlier about what else explains the fact that these groups of workers, such as home-based workers, but also some other forms of non-standard workers, are more exposed, if you like, to, or are exposed to more intensified exploitation. I wonder what are the debates there in terms of the fact that these workers have also a certain profile in a number of cases. For instance, gender plays a role. In some cases, ethnicity plays a role, religious affiliation. We know age might play a role in other cases. So all this migrant status, all these different variables kind of make some groups of workers more prone to actually be in these non-standard forms of employment. So if you could say a bit on that and what's been the ILO's work on that. And the other question I had is more, it speaks more to the fact that we're speaking about non-standard workers very much in relation to standard workers. And we know that the standard terms of employment are something, the group of workers that have enjoyed this standard is really shrinking. So where is this debate going in terms of, I mean, the ILO has been speaking about future of work. So how is that future of work discourse speaks to this reality in which we see an explosion of different forms of non-standard forms of employment, and are there new terms coming up, especially as we know that when the term precarious workers was first used, the employers didn't like it. No. And then they wanted to have non-standard workers. And I hear now that they don't like non-standard workers either.
They like diverse forms of employment.
Yeah, so I think if you could shed some light into also these definitional issues, I think it'd be interesting for discussion. But thanks a lot.
Well, I mean, first, I speak for myself whenever I'm talking, not this is not the ILO official opinion. But well, let's start with the first thing, that non-standard workers often are peculiar kind of workers. Totally. I mean, this shows up in everywhere we look in all our statistics. So let's go start with home-based workers. 2/3 of workers are males, okay? But 2/3 of home-based workers are females. It's inverted. So, you know, home-based work is gender. It's gender. It's a gender issue almost everywhere. And in some places, like it's a gender issue on multiple fronts. Not only are they a majority of women, but the gender wage gap is even larger among home-based workers than among other workers. If you look at part-time workers, well, part-time workers, they are either young or old, overwhelmingly feminine also. If you look at temporary workers, they are overwhelmingly young, more likely to be women, although in this case, it's not that as important as in the other two cases. So everywhere you look in non-standard forms of employment, there are particular types of workers that, you know, fit into one or the other category, no doubt about that. That in itself, to me, is not essentially a problem, because if non-standard forms of employment were decent forms of employment always, I mean, what in the sense, if you work part-time because you want to work part-time and you get the same hourly wage and you have the same rights and you have, you know, your vacations and you have your employment protection, you know, if you want to work part-time, that shouldn't be an issue for anybody except between you and your employer, as long as you're, you know, you've got everything you're entitled to and everything that a full-time worker is entitled to. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So as far as I see, I think, you know, the big objective, the big challenge is to get to decent work for these non-standard types of workers. Now, the standard working arrangement has never been a majority, even close to, of the workers in the world. I mean, it's never, I don't know what it was at its peak. I don't know if it was, you know, 20 or 30%. I don't have the number here, but it's never been a majority. You know, what we call the standard work arrangement has always been a peculiar work arrangement. What did change is that over a very long period, it was increasing. So if you looked in the 60s and 70s, you know, the general idea was that your formal, full-time, permanent worker who worked at the employer's premises and was directly employed, you know, without any triangular, that this guy was the future, you know. And the statistics kind of went in that direction, you know. The standard form of employment gradually increased over a long period of time, both in richer countries and in developing countries. Now, what happened, I don't know, it's a few decades already this has been happening, is that this stopped. And once again, it's not that the standard form of employment is threatened, it's going to disappear, there will be no more, you know, that's also an exaggeration. But if it wasn't, on the one hand, it was never true that they were going to, you know, that they were a majority and that they were all workers were going towards the standard form of employment, it's not true that they're disappearing now either. But it is true that these diverse forms of employment, to use the words that the employers like today, I don't know if they'll change their minds about it later on, that these diverse forms of employment, they are becoming more and more common and more diversified. And it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge for us at the ILO, certainly, because we have to understand this and try to provide guidance. So, for example, platform work, the ILO has no position on platform work. We don't have an opinion yet about this. We hope to have one at the end of this year, but we still don't have one. But it's also a challenge for national governments whose legislations are becoming more and more out of date, given these new forms of employment becoming more and more important. It's a challenge also for employers, and it's also a challenge for unions. It's a challenge for everybody.
Yeah, so thank you, Sergei. Any questions from the floor? If not, maybe I can put in just one last question. A couple of days ago or last week, I saw this survey by the European Trade Union Institute 2001 about the platform economy. And they said that the workers in the platform economy generates huge turnover, low income for workers engaged in there, and basically no new employment. Any reactions with those findings? And do you know if any other studies elsewhere have similar or different conclusions?
There are platform work is all over the place. First, because it's difficult even to define it. There is no consensual definition of what platform work is. So some people considering selling things on eBay or creating content for YouTube as being platform work. I would not tend to think of that as platform work, but a lot of the studies that are about platform workers consider these people as platform workers. I would say that there would be a consensus that in general, platform work, like other non-standard forms of work, it's not for many workers the ideal job. It's often not well paid, particularly if you look at sometimes crowd workers, for example. They're surprisingly poorly paid when you take into consideration the fact that they have a lot of non-paid time that they have to spend looking for work on the platform also. It has very little job security, if any. And the story about not generating any employment, that's more complicated because it's hard to know about what the counterfactual is. But I think that its platforms almost nowhere are regulated, and this is to the detriment of platform workers. I think what we need is, like as other forms of non-standard employment, is not necessarily being against platform work, but saying, look, it has to be regulated. These workers, they have the right to earn a minimum wage. And then you say, oh no, the platforms will often say, no, it's not my problem that they're not making a minimum wage. I don't do anything. I just intermediate. Yeah, but if you're intermediating an illegal contract because they're making less than a minimum wage, you're not doing things right. So I think in this case, I think in most cases, I said, oh, legislation is not enough. We have a lot of in platform work, in particular, we don't have a lot of legislation. And I think that this is an area where we really need more legislation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I know we're almost over time, but let's field the Cheng Li's question.
Yes. Thank you very much, Sergei. Very interesting. And I'm very sorry. I know we're almost closing and over time, but I just want to add a little bit comment on the platform workers. And I totally agree with Sergei. We definitely need more regulations. But what I observed is now, for example, if someone interested, we can also take a look at the riders law in Spain. They already passed a law to regulate delivery workers. So again, it's not about the platform work. All are conducted by what we would call workers. And that's the issue now about this platform or crowdsourcing workers, their employee recognition. Most in the cases, as I'm doing the research also, are three groups more or less. So in the United States, most of the states so far are still by this kind of through the California of the Prop 19, and they consider as the independent contractors. Mm-hmm. This is one case. And one case are more in Europe, especially like Spain, and they have a specific law, a very new law implemented this year. They consider as workers, and also include Germany and Netherlands, many countries in Europe. This would be a second regulations. And the third one, I think it would be more interesting, and I feel a little bit more precautious, is a situation in UK, and because by their law they do have in between categories. Not as an employee, but as a worker. So you have parts of the rights as a worker. And I think that is really precautious, because many countries, as what I see, for example, from China, they start trying to moving towards this, have a third categories of to regulate the platform workers. I think so far, because of this work quite new, so many countries are still not arriving, for example, in Brazil, still not arriving in the Supreme Court, whether to judge their workers by law or not. But I think each country was supposed to have eye on it. We look at how they're going to regulate, because at the end, the statutes of the employee would be determine all the things. I'm sorry again. Thanks. Yeah.
No,
Any
I totally agree
reactions,
with you.
Sergey?
No,
before
I
we close?
totally agree. I totally agree with everything that was said, including in particular. I agree with the desirability of the third way, like you're thinking of in China. You know, of regulating platform workers in particular, like they do in UK also. It's a particular work arrangement which needs a particular type of regulation.
So yeah, with that, we'll close the workshop for today. Again, thank you to Sergey for taking time and his presentation and responses, and also to our participants for the sharing and interesting questions. So